FM.
Furby's 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Good night, everyone, and welcome to Kaieteur Radio Special 2020 1-year anniversary elections recap. My name is Kemol King.
And I am Shikema Day.
And I'm Mikaila Friends.
Folks, it is extremely important for us to have this recap tonight because so much has happened since the swearing in of the President, Dr. Irfan Ali, and his cabinet. And, you know, there have been many attempts, and there will continue to be many attempts by some persons to detract from the stories that we have told about what happened during the elections. There are many people who are going to try to deny what happened, and they're going to try to rewrite history.
Yes.
There are many people who have, on to this day, refused to accept what happened to this country in those 5 months following March 2nd. So that is why it is very fitting for us to have this conversation. We at Kaieteur News, myself and my colleagues here, we had a front row seat to what happened last year. And while some may try to deny what happened, we haven't forgotten a single detail. So I'm going to ask my colleague Mikaila to start us off by telling us a little about the first lap of the election cycle from March 2nd on to when we realized this was a much bigger problem.
Thank you, Kemol. Yes, you are right about the three of us here having a front row seat to all of the events of the 2020 elections. Let me just inform the listeners and the viewers that prior to this election, well, the 2020 elections, the three of us, Mikaila, Kemol, and Shikema, had zero experience on how to handle an election.
Yes.
We had the guidance, all of the guidance from the editors here at Kaieteur News, especially Mr. Leonard Gildari, and
Mr. Ruel Johnson.
And Mr. Ruel Johnson as well, yes. And so we went into very unfamiliar water. We were terrified, but also very excited because it was the first time that we were covering an election. And the first day, I remember Kemol and I, we went to the school just off of Sheriff Street.
Yes.
We were meeting with the election observers, all the different ones, just to get an update on how smoothly the elections were going. I had met early that morning with Mr. Owen Arta, who was the head of the Commonwealth Observer Mission.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Owen Arta was the former Prime Minister of Barbados, and last year, before our election results were announced, he passed away. But I met with him. He is a statesman, an amazing guy.
He was a statesman.
Yes, and when we spoke with him that morning, he said, we got up since 6. The polls were open since that time. People were banging drums.
I was just about to mention that because I could recall waking up at 5 to get myself ready for to cover the election. So excited, and people were passing through the blow, let it blow, blow, blow. It's elections. Y'all come out and vote.
Yeah.
It was so exciting.
Yes, it
that
was.
energy
Well,
was
I
amazing.
could recall being woken up hours before I had intended to wake up, wondering why people are banging drums and telling people to come out.
Yes.
Like, I needed my sleep before I had to deal with
Yes.
this day especially.
Yes, it was, and it will forever be the mother of all elections. It was a very contentious period. And so we got up, we met with the Commonwealth Observer Group and the Carter Center, and they all reported, we got up really early. We went to multiple polling stations. We had zero hiccups, just like small.
Very smooth.
Yeah, very
Very
smooth.
smooth,
Minor
yeah.
things where people, stamped something incorrectly, but very smart, minor things that they rectified at the polling stations. And we went to different places around the city. I remember coming down to the end of the day. Shikema and I, we went behind Albois Town
Yeah.
to see the close of polls. And, there were still people in the line. This is like 6 o'clock in the evening. we went there and we saw, you know,
I think
people, you
people
know,
were rushing home to get home from work just to make sure that
Yes.
they actually went to the polls. That's why a lot of persons were voting so late.
yes. We even, well, one instance, I remember Kemol and I don't remember what school it was. I think it's Tocqueville. But we were there and we spoke to one of the election observers. I don't remember from which team. But he said, you know, earlier today, you know, there were some people from the coalition supporters who set up tents outside of these polling stations, and they were intimidating people, saying, "Oh no, you can't. You know, they're not allowing you. They're not conducting voting. You know, like that sort of thing." He related to us, but he said everything else went smoothly.
All in all, it was a smooth.
It was a very smooth day.
And I think-
We came back to the office. We wrote our stories. We were expecting, you know, by
Results the
week's
next day.
end,
Not the
by the
week.
week's end,
Like
we
2
would have
days
gotten
after,
some results.
Okay, but we should note that at the end of this day, what is pivotal to the development of this story is that all stakeholders reported a
Yes.
smooth
Yes.
and fair process
This,
without
yes.
hiccups.
Yes, this is from the New Movement, a New United Guyana, the Liberty and Justice Party,
Everyone
the
basically
Citizenship
said
The
Yeah.
Initiative.
APNU plus AFC.
Yes,
Everybody.
and the PPC. Everybody reported everything went smoothly. We had a great election day, and I can't wait for the results.
But then things
But then-
started to go downhill
Yeah.
just like 3 days after.
Yes, 3 days after, on March
Fourth.
4th.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that was technically it would be the 5th. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think a few days had passed,
Yes.
and we were wondering why is the
Yeah.
count stalled?
Yes.
Because GCOM said that they would give us a virtual update
Yes.
of the progress of the count. And they did put up a virtual update that was broadcast on national television.
Yes.
But it was for quite a while that the count was stuck at one number. And I
Yeah.
think that was the first point at which a lot of people
Yeah. True that.
started to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. So we had all of the different regions were sending in the SOP saying, "Oh, well, we have our numbers," saying, just sending in the numbers of what the parties gathered in the 10 different regions,
not
and
running up.
everything came down to, everything was running smoothly. I mean, we were still very anxious, but coming down to Region 4,
Yes.
Region 4, one of the most contentious regions, and I think when it got there, then everybody, like, that's when things really started to plummet. So the count was being done at the infamous
Ashman's building.
Ashman's
Building.
building. Ooh, I still get the trauma, the
yes,
trauma.
I pass that place every day, every other day, and I
Look at
shudder,
it.
Yeah.
and I look, So we had everybody gathered there. We had all of the diplomats, people from the parties. We had the media. Supporters were even there, and we were all gathered to see that, make sure that everything went smoothly. We very many sleepless nights just to stay there to make sure that things, were going according to plan.
So I remember when the results started to come in, we had gotten substantial results for just about every region
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
besides Region
Yes.
4.
That is correct.
And I remember doing a tabulation of the results so far and thinking for the 9 regions so far, it's going to be very difficult for the APNU AFC to bridge this lead.
Yes.
So it looked at that point as though the PPPC
We're already
would win the
winners,
election.
yes.
And even when you look back at, say, the performances of the two major parties in the previous election, you could tell that if APNU were to win Region 4 by the same gap that it won in the previous election, it still would be significantly behind the PPP in the national count.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that's when the whole issue with the Region 4 returning officer,
Oh.
Mr. Claremont Mingo, the
Mingo,
infamous
yeah,
Mr.
Mingo.
Mingo,
I-
it started.
Yes, Mingo by now is a household name.
Yes, the one
like,
Mingo.
probably international by now. So we, when they were doing the tabulation for the Region 4 count, I remember I spoke to Mr. Kit Nascimento, who was one of the observers for the PSC, and many other people who said, things were going smoothly, and then Mingo pull out some spreadsheet, and I'm like, I don't understand. He's like, you're supposed to be counting from the ballots that you have, 1, 2, 3, 4, yada, yada, yada. But all of a sudden, Mr. Claremont Mingo brings out a spreadsheet where he concocted from, I do not know.
That's the thing.
And he's just started reading numbers. And I remember this. Mr. Kit Nascimento, and this was a couple days after the elections, the PSC had a press conference, and these businesses, they reported, were so worried because the elections were stalled, and they, were frightened. And Mr. Nascimento said, I remember they were reading the numbers out so fast, like 102, 103, 104, 105, like so fast that they could not record. Because these observers, they were taking notes to make sure that everything was corresponding. And that's when things, they started to get something, something is very suspicious.
So there was so much that happened at the Ashman's building.
Yeah.
Like, I think someone went to the hospital.
Mr. Mingo did fall ill, and then I think that is when...
let me call, he fell ill, air quotations, yeah. And so the count was stalled, and
there was the flash drive.
There was the flash drive.
Issue, God.
Yes,
yeah.
I think you covered that issue, Shikema.
Mr. I can't remember his first name, but I do recall that his last name is Levan. When the count restarted that late that evening, after Mr. Mingo returned from the hospital, there was an issue where this guy, they were using a flash drive to computate the numbers on the GCOM computer. And then all of a sudden, he just came, pulled out the flash drive, and then went into a room and locked himself into the room with the computer. And he was not coming out.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, the police were called in, and all the observers and everybody in there were trying to find out, why is he locked in the room with the flash drive? What is going on? And then after some time, like after half an hour, he came out and he was arrested, and then the count was stalled again. Yeah. So we could not get the results, and the nation was left anxiously waiting.
There were
results.
so many stalls that happened, and like you can't even consider them to be a coincidence.
It was
because
crazy.
It was like stall after stall after stall
and
after stall.
And not to forget that there was a report of a bomb
scare
there
was
at
a bomb
the
scare.
Ashman's building with everybody there.
Everybody had to evacuate the building.
It
and
was
mind
crazy.
you, this I think this was like 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. Yeah, and it was crazy. And then we had supporters from the coalition and gathering outside of the building.
Yeah, so clearly there had to be a concerted effort to keep scrutiny off of what was going on in the Ashman's building. We were prevented from entering the building because, first of all, a section of the building was supposed to be a media center.
Yes. It was, yeah.
So the first red flag that raised was you decide to have the count and you put the media out of the building. And at some point, they even told us that we can't be within
300 meters of
when
the
they started
building.
setting up the barricades.
Yeah, mind you, like this, the first day we had, the first day of the elections, we went to this media center. Everybody was there. We sat. We did our notes.
Badges. They gave us accreditation
badges. That you can have access to this building. And then the following days after, we were locked outside of the Ashman's entrance. There was no tent set up for the media. Whether it was rain or sun or hail, we had to just endure all of that.
And we had to be there standing with the protesters who were screaming and pushing on the barricades. And it was crazy out there. That is what we had to endure during that time.
And then I think they realized that the media was not going to stand for, any hullabaloo. So what they did, like my colleague Kemol indicated, they pushed us back 300 meters away from the Ashman's building. So for those, I'm pretty sure the listeners and viewers know, the Ashman's building is on Hatfield Street, and the media was moved from Hatfield Street all the way to Brick Dam, set behind a barricade, and we could not go further than there. The only persons who had like really good access to see what was going on were the cameramen who had, obviously long lens, and the photographers, but we could not tell what was going on in there.
And so much things happened within the vicinity of the Ashman's building, and between from Ashman's, and we had to move to the GCOM headquarters at Heights in Kingston.
Yes.
But in between that time, we also had the former public security minister and the telecommunications minister. I could recall I went to a press conference. And while the count was going on, the count was stalled. They were talking about Russians trying to hack a pencil and paper elections.
That is...
I still cannot wrap my head around that. And the thing is, they said that they deported the 3 persons that they arrested because they had intel that these people were going to hack the elections. So I asked them, I recall asking Mr. Ramchitan, where is the evidence? Oh, you have to trust me. That is what he said. You have
Trust
to trust
you
me.
as a stakeholder,
Yes.
as a direct
Yes.
competitor
Yeah.
in this election. I have
Yeah.
to trust
It
you.
was so crazy. Like the amount of things that were done to try to hamper this count is what led to the recount being started.
Okay, so before we leave Ashman's building, so much happened. There was so much commotion that it was apparent later on that a declaration had been made. And we
Yeah.
didn't even know about the declaration. There were murmurs about the declaration. And we had to ask so many people, get so much confirmation before we heard that the returning officer went up on a balcony
Yes.
In
Yeah.
the Ashman's
and made a
building.
declaration to protest from especially the People's Progressive Party Civic. So, first of all, people started to doubt the legitimacy of that. And so the reason why we moved from Ashman's building was because we found out that the PPP had brought an injunction in the court challenging the legitimacy
The court cases.
of
The court
the
cases.
the first declaration. And when they went to court, we had the Chief Justice who ruled that the declaration was unlawful because the returning officer did not follow the process of verification that he needed to in order to make it a lawful count, because the
Yes.
law sets out exactly how you're supposed to do it.
And I can't forget, guys, we can't forget that while all of this was happening, there were protests at both on the West Coast and also on the East Coast of Demerara, where people died because the nation was so anxious and people were getting antsy. Businesses were closed.
Yes.
People weren't getting to shop. The nation was like at a standstill.
I remember on the West Barbies, I think shortly after Mingo made that declaration
Yeah.
in the Ashman's building, protests broke out immediately. One man,
Died, yeah.
I read a story this morning where one man was shot dead. You had police women and police officers
Police
and
officers
children
were
and
injured,
women.
yeah, it was
Like,
crazy.
people were just, in harm's way because of this whole election thing. We also had protests around the city. I remember banks and stuff like that were, hammering boards on their
Yes,
window just
yeah.
to keep their businesses safe. That was the atmosphere in the city for a very long time.
It's like you're so used to Georgetown being a buzz with people and
Yeah.
so packed in the day, and you see the
It
town
was very
it was
eerie.
just
Yes,
very
it was.
eerie, very silent. Not a lot of people coming out to shop. Like, we did not know the state of the country during that period.
Okay, let's move over to Kingston.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened there, Shikema.
Okay, so when we moved over to Kingston, and one specific issue I want to talk about is something that we will never forget, and that is the night of Mingo's last declaration. We were at the office, and when we heard that Mingo was about to make another declaration after the Chief Justice ordered him to restart the count.
So I think at that point we had been waiting all day,
Yes, we were
hoping
waiting
that
on
they would
word.
finish,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't. So we decided we'd just come home, and they'd
Uh-huh.
probably finish in the morning.
Yeah.
Little
Because
did we know.
We were staking out the GCOM HQ from since at least 12 in the afternoon in the hot sun. We were there. We were just awaiting word. We were so anxious. So we were back at the office, and then we got word that Mingo was going to make his declaration in 5 minutes. So we were excited. We literally just rushed out and got into a vehicle and went to GCOM HQ. So there, the police barricaded a section along by High Street, I
Yeah.
think it was, and protesters were there. So as soon as we went to the front entrance, they saw us and they did not let us pass. And we decided to go around to the other entrance. And there it gets a bit wild. So the area was dark. We did not see anyone really there. But so we jumped out of the vehicle and we were just rushing to make sure that we get the declaration. We make sure we're there to get it accurately so we can tell it to the nation. And as soon as we start running in, supporters, APNU AFC supporters came out from each sides. They came out in the dark and they started shouting, "Who are y'all? Who are y'all? What y'all doing here? Whatever, whatever." So when we said that we were media, they immediately started forming a crowd around. I could recall I was in front and Mikaila was behind me, and they started
Shouting, "No
they
media,
started,
no media."
We don't want y'all here.
Mind you,
And-
sorry to interject, Shikema,
Continue.
but just to give some context to this, there were at least about 50 coalition supporters who just came storming at us.
We didn't even know where they came from because the place was dark. We just saw people rushing to us. So you can imagine how scary that was. And now I am a person like this. Like, I am focused on my job. And I remember that there was a lady in front of me. She was screaming in my face, "We don't want media here. We don't want the media here." And I can recall her just putting her hands on me and just shoving me a little back. And I think at that time, Kemol saw that the situation was getting out of hand. So he just decided, he told us, like, let's get back to the car.
Let me tell you what it was like from my perspective. I have these two young women with me, rushing forward in a crowd of people shouting, "No media, no media." At one point, what I was thinking was, regardless of what's happening with this crowd, we can make our way in there because we have a right to be there.
Yeah.
But then there was one point where I looked, and when the no media was loud enough, so many people turned to look at us. And at that point, everyone started running toward us. So maybe they did not have the intention to be violent, but I saw a scenario in which the situation could get violent very quickly. If you understand crowd mentality, if one punch is thrown, one accidental punch or one accidental hit,
Yeah.
then everyone goes crazy.
Yep.
And I see Shikema, who is very, very headstrong, standing off with this woman. And I'm like, Shikema, I had to call her a few times to tell her, let's go back. This is not worth it. We are going to get the work. And when we turned around, we basically had to run because they chased us back to the
Yeah.
vehicle. And then we reached out to the public relations officer at GCOM, Yolanda Ward, and asked why we couldn't be let in. Why wasn't GCOM making the necessary effort to ensure the safety and the access of the media?
Even
When we
worse,
got
why
back,
wasn't the police there? Because police officers were there. That's the thing. Police officers were beyond the other barricades, and they could do nothing. We were barred from entering GCOM HQ, and they stood there. They did nothing.
But and the thing is, you have to also look at the officer supporter ratio. There were more coalition supporters out there than we had seen police officers all together.
Yeah,
You know,
true.
so it was a very tough situation, and we didn't feel like GCOM had our security in their
at heart,
consideration. Yeah. But yeah,
Okay.
carry on, Shikema.
So we get back into our vehicle and we make our way back to work. And I think what happened, it only sunk in when we got back to the office and the adrenaline was pumping. And I recall Mikaila going into the bathroom and she's just there. And I just went to my desk and everything is just replaying and I just start crying because it was so much. Like, we've been dealing with all of this, and then for that to happen, like, we were so scared. I just started crying. I could not control my emotions because it was that traumatic. And that is one experience from this entire elections debacle that I will never, ever, ever, ever forget.
you know, Shikema, we come here, we report the news, or we come on the radio and we talk about it. And I think it was so important for us as journalists to get into not just telling the public what we saw, but how
we
it
felt.
affected us.
Yes.
In that period, it was not just our safety that was an issue. It was us dealing with the pressure of thinking that our entire democracy could be
Yeah.
destabilized. And then when COVID came on,
Oh, God, that was...
when everybody had to stay in their houses,
we had to
we
go.
were out there risking our lives to make sure that the people got the news. So it's extremely important that the people know how traumatic this was for us, because among reporters, among ourselves, we're still talking about getting counseling and getting help for those traumatic 5 months.
So you really, really and truly understand the impact of what happened and how this affected all the reporters, the entire country, because I'm sure that the entire country is still very traumatized.
So let's fast forward to
The recount.
the recount. But before that, I'll say, because we did not have access to the Kingston headquarters, a declaration happened. We didn't know. What we had to do that night was start calling all of these party leaders and representatives who were counting agents there, trying to get an understanding of what happened. And just let me give a quick synopsis. We spoke to about 8 party representatives who all told us the same thing. They rushed through this count, giving numbers which were clearly fraudulent, which were clearly clumsily doctored.
Yes.
And we could not accept this. And even when we tried to ask them to hold on, let us get a better view, they did not accede to those requests. So another declaration was made, and I suppose we thought we would have gone back to the court.
Yeah.
But GCOM decided that it would be better to have a recount. And in the period when we had to wait for the recount to happen, this was so crazy because the fraudulent declaration happened on March 6th, and the recount started all the way in early May.
Yeah.
So that was March, April, 2 months and change that we had to wait for this recount to start.
And between that time, we were running back and forth from the court back to GCOM HQ, late night staking out GCOM HQ just to get some information as to what was going on. And then the recount was another crazy experience.
Don't forget that there were very clear attempts to prevent the recount from happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Mikaila, if
You
you can
know,
start.
This is how duplicitous the coalition is. Like in one hand, they're saying, you know, I want this recount. Let's have this recount. I want these people to know that we won this election. And then at the same time, you have coalition supporters going to the court to bar the recount. I don't understand what was happening. So the recount, they said, okay, we're going to have the recount at the Artichoke Convention Center.
When we finally got it.
Finally
Yeah,
got
right?
it. And I remember, I think it was Shikema and I, we were there, and Kemol as well, and we were there since the morning. Very
10
early in the morning.
I remember this day very vividly.
Yes. So we're there, and we see vehicles passing in. Every now and again, we would see a truck with a container drive in, and those containers contained the ballot boxes.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the vibe whole day. And noon passes, 3 o'clock passes, 6 o'clock passes, and we're there at 9 o'clock. And then all of a sudden we hear somebody come outside. Oh, the recount is starting. Yeah, they got fumigate the building for ants.
The wildest thing ever. I could not believe it. At 7, no, it was like at 9 in the evening when the recount is supposed to start.
Yeah.
You are fumigating for ants. I mean, when we got this recount, did you not know that all of these systems had to be put in place
Yes.
before everybody else assembled at this building?
Like it's not rocket science, it's not physics. You know, people are going to be there. You prepare the building, and so that day went and no recount.
There was clearly a lot of efforts to, even if you couldn't stop the recount from happening, try to buy time to do whatever it is you were
Yes.
planning to do to derail the process. So 2 things we're gonna focus on specific to the recount process, and then we'll jump to the last lap.
Yeah.
So the first thing would be treatment of the press, and the second thing would be allegations of electoral fraud. I'm going to talk about treatment of the press. We were told by GCOM's PRO that they were considering letting the media stay under a tent inside the compound of the Artichoke Conference Center. That was not so. First day, we were standing out there basically on the grass.
Yeah.
And everything we got to facilitate the media outside of the center, on the lawns of the center, we had to shame the GCOM
For it,
into putting there for us.
Yes, but just before that, sorry, Kemol, but on the first day when we were there were public spirited people passing by, and they saw the media just sitting on the like I remember just standing on the one of the coconut trees just to get a little shade. And people saw, I think I remember Mr. Bpat from Giftland.
Yes.
They sent water for us
Lunch,
because GCOM
cheers.
provided no water, no food, no snacks, nothing at all. They sent cheers for us just so that we could be comfortable to make sure that everything was going smoothly.
And it was at this point that you started to get the feeling that even though a lot of people were locked into their homes, they were prepared to hold hand in hand with the press and all the other stakeholders who had to keep a light shining on this process. We received so much support from people who saw us and decided we're going to maybe try and bring cheers for you and so on. So I remember, I think it was myself or Neil Marks from Newsroom taking the first photo of media workers just out on the grass. We shamed GCOM into getting us a tent. Then we shamed GCOM into getting us electrical sockets to charge our devices. We shamed them into getting us flooring so we didn't have to stay in the grass.
Especially when the rains came, because the rains came and then we were standing in the mud.
Yeah.
I
Because there was no
remember
flooring.
at one point we had the tent, but it was so shoddy that when the rain fell, all of the media got soaked.
Yeah.
And our equipment was also at risk of getting wet.
Yes.
So then we had to get something to wall off for us from the wind and the rain.
Yeah.
And then we finally got food coming to us.
And we even had to shame GCOM to provide
A podium.
portable washrooms.
Mhm.
I don't even remember. Because at the time I was living at Ogle, which is just a couple minutes away, and I had to go home to use the washroom. That's how bad it was.
Kemol, I guess you can relay your experience with
Oh,
using
Oh,
the
God.
washroom at
You know,
the
I
aquatic
didn't
center.
want to get into this too much because it's so absurd. It just makes you think, you never thought that when you go into an election, things like this would happen to you. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, folks. This was before we got the portable toilet. And I decided I was going to go over to the Artichon Conference Center to just use the washroom. I did not know what await me.
not the conference center, the aquatic center.
Aquatic
Right,
center.
sorry. So I went across the road and I meet up a few APNU AFC representatives who were, I suppose, counting agents at the Artichon Conference Center. And they decided to tell me that I could not use the washroom. They had commandeered the aquatic center, and after a standoff with them for just a minute, I decided that I would come back and not go. It didn't stop there. One of them went and posted on Facebook that they didn't want us to use the restroom because we went over to use it and soiled the toilet.
This is so crazy.
God. And that and all was a debacle. Restroom use was a debacle when we're trying to cover the election. It is so absurd that this happened. I don't even want to think about it anymore because I think the person that went to make the post on Facebook was a pastor.
Yeah.
And I had confronted him about it. And he eventually admitted, oh, it was not the truth that we're saying.
And I think it's after when we got all of this equipment from GCOM and then we were comfortable. That is when the madness started.
So let's talk about the accusations of electoral fraud.
The dead and the migrant voters.
Tell me, Shikema, what were the specific accusations, the major accusations that we had to deal with, and some of the personalities that came out to the media center to make those allegations?
So with the recount, they started using observation reports. They moved from SOPs to observation reports. And the coalition had an
And the
issue.
statements of recount.
And
Yes.
the statements of recount. So they had an issue with the observation reports.
Well,
because-
just tell the public first what the observation reports were and what the statements of recount are.
So the observation reports basically noted, whether if there's a unused ballot, a void ballot, stuff like that. That is basically what the
Just to
observation
record
report-
things
Yeah,
that-
just to
yeah.
record things
That
you
were a
found
little unusual
Yeah.
or
Inside.
didn't appear to follow the process.
inside of the ballot boxes. So the first allegations we got were that of the migrant voters. So they had a lot of coalition counting agents there, and they had their like long list with names of people, and as they called out the ballot box number, they would start ticking off names. So the other counting agents found that weird, and they wanted to know what is really going on. It wasn't until we had big members from the coalition like Mr. Roysdale Ford and other persons come outside. Aubrey Norton,
Kathy Hughes.
Yes, they came outside and they were like, "Oh, we found instances of persons who migrated and their names are ticked off as voted." So that started a whole debacle, and I could remember vividly when they released the list of migrant voters, the list that they claimed that they got from the passport office. There were 2 names. And the persons on that list were my family members. They claimed that these people were out of the country on March 2nd. I know because these are my family members that they were in the country and they voted. And the people voted for the coalition, yet their names were still on the list as having been migrated and ticked off. So that was very crazy.
Yeah.
And that's just some of the allegations, and we moved to the dead voters.
Oh, God.
The same thing. They started taking off names of people who had died, and they reportedly voted on March 2nd. And I could even recall Mr. Leonard Craig when they produced a death certificate of this woman who they claimed had voted on March 2nd, but the woman had died since like years ago. So do you see how wild and how crazy the claims were?
And when it happened, I think it was so easy to dispel
Yes.
Yeah.
these claims because they were not grounded in fact at all. All you had to do was message a party representative and say, "Could you assist me with getting the observation report or the statement of recount or the statement of poll for this specific ballot box? Let's interrogate the claim that they're making." At this point, it became very clear from the allegations that were being made by people like Aubrey Norton under the media tent and with the misinformation campaign on social media that what we had here was a case of somebody realizing we lost this election. So instead of accepting that loss and instead of facing what happened a few months ago with the Region 4 returning officer clearly rigging the Region 4 count, they would cast doubt on the integrity of the entire electoral process.
It was a well-coordinated effort.
These are the same people who reported on at the end of March 2nd. The election was smooth and we got no hiccups and everything went great. And now you're coming 2 months later to say, "Oh, we have cases of voter irregularity."
People like Mr. David Patterson, Mr. Basil Williams, even the president had said,
at the time, it was a commodity. If you saw the president, it was like it was seeing a white elephant, because he was absent. We used to see the opposition leader, we saw Kathy Hughes, we see other people from the party, but we seldom saw Mr. President. Well, the former president.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think when it was the recount, he finally came out, and this was at the Aquatic Center. And what the coalition does, they're very strategic in that they would allow the media or the persons who are sympathetic to them, they would give them the go-ahead to answer questions. So you it was, and that was I think that was the last time we saw Mr. The second to last time we saw him. And I think a couple of months after the elections, there was an interview with a couple of media reps at the State House, and when they asked David Granger months after the elections, "Have you seen the SOPs?" "No, I haven't seen them."
That was very well. That was very well to me, because I mean, you're the leader of the party. How can you not see the party SOPs?
Look, I wish we had more time to get into all the absurdities. We only have 5 minutes, so we're going to try to wrap up. But there is so much that's unsaid with the whole process that we went through just now. It's going to take months to even get all of this out.
So now we have to fast forward to the recount.
At the end of the recount, when the count clearly showed
that
the PPP had won the elections, and this was when the APNU-AFC decided to put the crown on its campaign to claim that the
They win.
elections were not credible. But we had the CARICOM team, which was the main point of contact, I think, for the
Yeah.
international community, because there were clear attempts to keep out other observers.
Yes.
What did the CARICOM report say?
Well, the CARICOM report said that the count was smooth and it was fair. And it basically backed up the recount numbers that the PPPC had won the March 2, 2020 elections. And that was it.
It also reprimanded AP and UFC representatives for their behavior,
Yes.
The
which
claims.
it claimed was unacceptable. And it said that though it saw the observations that were made in the observations reports, the process, all in all, was fairly credible.
Yes.
So we got over this hurdle
With the recount.
of the recount, but it wasn't finished. We got to this point where even though we had the result right in front of us, we knew that the Region 4 returning officer rigged the elections. We knew that former Minister of Health, Valda Lawrence's signature was on the fraudulent declaration. There was so much in the public that we knew.
But yet they still.
But yet there were so many attempts at this point. This is where it became more barefaced, because we know what the results are now, but we have court case upon court case trying to prevent GCOM from declaring the true result of the election. And it did not just try to prevent GCOM from declaring the true results of the election, it also tried to force GCOM to make a declaration
Using-
based on Mingo's numbers, which were clearly fraudulent. And at that point, it's not the numbers that they brought forward that the chief elections officer, Mr. Keith Lowenfield, attempted to bring forward in his reports to the Guyana Elections Commission did not even exactly mirror the initial declaration of the chief of the District 4 returning officer, Claremont Mingo.
Just
So now
as-
it's like, where are you pulling these numbers out of?
Just as Mr. Mingo conjured numbers, Mr. Lowenfield also conjured numbers as well, because it was so crazy. The numbers did not add up. And I can recall at least 3 times he was asked to go and prepare the results, the declaration, using the correct results as
Oh my
stated
God.
in the recount.
Yeah.
This is all just coming back to me.
But then we have to fast forward because we don't have enough time as we wind down to the last day when the declaration was actually made. I can recall I was outside of the GCOM HQ. Kemol and Mikaila were coming to meet me. And then we heard that the chair ordered Mr. Lowenfield to make the declaration using the correct numbers from the recount. And I'm thinking to myself, is this actually going to happen? I don't
After
believe
he
this.
made many attempts to give
Yeah.
incorrect
Something
After
numbers.
to myself.
seeking clarity.
All of this happened. I'm thinking to myself, are we actually going to get a declaration today? Is this really happening? Is this going to be happening? And then a declaration is made. And as soon as the declaration is made, within like half an hour, we had a swearing in.
Yeah. I remember when I just heard whispers of a declaration. I was in the office and tears came to my
Yes,
eyes
it was
because
so
it was so
emotional.
frustrating. And to finally have a declaration, I was so happy, but I was also so afraid
Yeah.
because I didn't know if we were going to have another 5 months.
And here's why. Even after the final declaration was made, you were holding your breath because you were wondering
What's gonna
whether it
happen.
was really over.
Yes.
Because we were thinking to ourselves, the last lap is the declaration. And once we get over the declaration, maybe we're finished. But we went through so much hiccups and back and forths and trauma during this 5-month period that even when the declaration happened, even as we went to the swearing in, we were still holding our breaths.
Yes.
Even as we saw the president get sworn in, it was like, is this really happening? Are we over? Are we finished with it? That was how traumatic this entire 5-month period was. But we got there and it ended, but the trauma that we experienced throughout those months, it lives on forever.
Let me ask you both to make your closing comments very quickly.
Yeah, you go ahead, Shikema.
For me, this has been a learning experience because it made me a better journalist, and it taught me experiences that I would never get any other time. But I just want to say that I hope that the country never has to experience that again. Never. That's it.
Okay, just to echo what Shikema said on the learning experience that I gained from this very traumatic 5 months, and on the note of this never happening again, it brings me joy to know that the PPPC government, through the Attorney General chambers, they are looking to reform legislation to ensure that what happened that 5 month period never happens again, so that they can reprimand the GCOM officers and to ensure that democracy is protected at all costs. So I'm very happy about that.
Well, you know what? Let's hope, because even 5-6 months down the line after the final declaration was made, no substantial changes have been made.
True.
We've seen charges being brought against people, but all of these people who, even the officials of GCOM that played part and parcel in this very naked attempt to steal a national election, they're all still in place. True. So you really have to ask yourself, is there justice in this country when you can commit one of the worst atrocities, trying to destabilize the democracy of an entire country to steal a national election? You have to ask yourself, even if that happens, half a year down the line, people have not been punished. The reform has not started yet. You have to ask yourself, is there any justice in this country? You know, I can go tell people I learned a lot from this election, but there are some things I wish I never had to experience. I learned a lot from the elections, and I'm a better journalist now for it, but this was a terrifying period. Not just for us, but for the entire country.
Same.
And we have abusers on the news, in the media, and in Parliament still refusing to accept what happened. Imagine that you are in a relationship with somebody and you decide at one point that you want to leave the relationship because the person has been abusing you. You finally get out of the relationship, but you still have to see the abuser around you all the time. And you have the abuser constantly gaslighting you, telling you, this never happened. I never did this. It's all in your head. That is what is happening to this entire country till now. And we have to make sure that no matter the attempts to deny or this history or to rewrite this history, we keep telling the stories that people need to hear.
Yes. Yes.
So with that, I thank you everyone for joining us on the radio and on the Facebook Live. I wish we had more time to get into this great discussion, but I would implore you, if you want to see the reforms made that have not been made yet, then get out to your constituents and tell them. Get out to your PPP constituents and tell them to hurry up with the reforms. Get out to your APNU AFC constituents and tell them stop lying about attempts made to produce a fraudulent declaration.
Yes.
So with that, I'm Kemol King.
I'm Shikema Day.
And I'm Mikaila Prince.
Have a great night.
Good evening.
Bye.
Bye.